Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Shravanam Diaries Podcast.
Reading Bhagavad Gita as it is, the book by His Divine Grace Abhay Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Chapter 13, Nature, the Enjoyer and Consciousness, texts 8-12. Amanitvam adambhitvam ahimsakshantirarjavam acharyopasanam shocham stharyam atmavinigraha indriyartheshu vairagyam anahankara evacha janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukha doshanudarshanam asaktirana bhishvangah putradara grihadishu nityam cha samachittatvam ishtanishtopapatishu mai channanya yogena bhaktiravyabicharini vivikta desha sevitvam aratirjana samsari adhyatma jnana nityatvam tattva jnanartha darshanam etajjnanam iti proktam ajnanam yad atonyatha. Humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, the rest. Even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. Purport. This process of knowledge is sometimes misunderstood by less intelligent men as being the interaction of the field of activity. But actually, this is the real process of knowledge. If one accepts this process, then the possibility of approaching the absolute truth exists. This is not the interaction of the 24 elements as described before. This is actually the means to get out of the entanglement of those elements. The embodied soul is entrapped by the body, which is a casing made of the 24 elements, and the process of knowledge as described here is the means to get out of it. Of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important point is described in the first line of the 11th verse. Mai chananya yogena bhaktiravya bicharini. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. So, if one does not approach or is not able to approach the transcendental service of the Lord, then the other 19 items are of no practical, particular value. Wow, they're of no particular value. But if one takes to the devotional service in full Krishna consciousness, the other 19 items automatically develop within him. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 5.18.12, Yasyasti bhaktir bhagavati kinchana sarvair gunais tatra samasate surah. All the good qualities of knowledge develop in one who has attained the stage of devotional service. The principle of accepting a spiritual master, as mentioned in the 8th verse, is essential, even for one who takes to devotional service. It is most important. Transcendental life begins when one accepts a bona fide spiritual master. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, clearly states here that this process of knowledge is the actual path. Anything speculated beyond this is nonsense. So, yeah, we know this. We call knowledge everything, like all the information that's out there, right? And there are temples of knowledge all over the world and there are online courses that will give you some divine, in quotes, divine, how do you call it, exclusive, not ever heard before knowledge that you just have to buy, otherwise you're missing out, right? So all that knowledge is out there. But here Srila Prabhupada, he explains, and Krishna, he establishes that interaction of the 24 elements, meaning senses and sense objects, the senses between the senses with other people's senses, anything, if you're learning about it, it's not real process of knowledge. It is some information, right? But here, let's read further. As for the knowledge outlined here, the items may be analyzed as follows. Humility means that one should not be anxious to have the satisfaction of being honored by others. The material conception of life makes us very eager to receive honor from others, but from the point of view of a man in perfect knowledge, who knows that he is not this body, anything, honor and dishonor, pertaining to this body is useless. One should not be hankering after this material deception. Wow. So honor and dishonor is material deception. People are very anxious to be famous for their religion, and consequently sometimes it is found that without understanding the principles of religion, one enters into some group which is not actually following religious principles, and then wants to advertise himself as a religious mentor. As for actual advancement in spiritual science, one should have a test to see how far he is progressing. He can judge by these items. So the first item to judge yourself, to see how far we're progressing, is whether we understand that honor and dishonor is what? Useless, because it's pertaining to this body and its material deception. Okay, next. Non-violence is generally taken to mean not killing or destroying the body. But actually, non-violence means not to put others into distress. People in general are trapped by ignorance in the material concept of life, and they perpetually suffer material pains. So unless one elevates people to spiritual knowledge, one is practicing violence. This is a very strong point. One should try his best to distribute real knowledge to the people so that they may become enlightened and leave this material entanglement. That is non-violence. Tolerance means that one should be practiced to bear insult and dishonor from others. If one is engaged in the advancement of spiritual knowledge, there will be so many insults and much dishonor from others. Now that's very encouraging. Tolerance. Actually, interestingly, that sometimes we misunderstand this point about tolerance, and we accept some material circumstances which can be intelligently avoided, but we just think that I have to tolerate, and then whole spiritual life becomes just about tolerance. That instead of love of God, we're developing love of tolerance. And I don't know where did that come from, but I had it for sure. But then you realize that, wow, actually, I was joking with Mataji Vrindavaneshwari that I used to think that, because Trinada Pisunichana, Tarora Pisahishnana, we have to be more tolerant than a tree. So, you can just jump before people so that they would walk on you, so that, you would be more tolerant than a tree. But then Kirtaniya Sadahari would not happen, because I would just constantly be angry, frustrated, and, So yeah, sometimes, you don't have to ask for it. You don't have to ask for insults and dishonor from others. But Prabhupada says that we should practice to bear insult and dishonor from others, because if we're engaged in the advancement of spiritual knowledge, there will be so many insults and so much dishonor from others. Now, let's read further. This is expected because material nature is so constituted. So you don't have to look for it. It will be there anyway. So, right. Even a boy like Prahlad, who only 5 years old was engaged in the cultivation of spiritual knowledge, was endangered when his father became antagonistic to his devotion. The father tried to kill him in so many ways, but Prahlad tolerated him. So there may be many impediments to making advancement in spiritual knowledge, but we should be tolerant and continue our progress with determination. Jai. So there are things which we can't change. There are things which we can do nothing about it. So yeah, we have to tolerate and continue with determination. Next. Simplicity means that without diplomacy, one should be so straightforward that he can disclose the real truth even to an enemy. I remember my husband, he took this particular sentence and he made it into like a poster type of a thing. And actually, this is something I wish in the present day and age, present time, in our movement, we would all practice. It would be so wonderful. Because political correctness, diplomacy, it's like something you have to imbibe, otherwise you can't function sometimes, I feel. But yeah, this is what it means. This is important. Simplicity means that without diplomacy, one should be so straightforward that he can disclose the real truth even to an enemy. Straightforward. I always valued straightforwardness, I think my entire life. And I wish that you could really apply this principle. It would save so much time. So I'm really deeply meditating on this simplicity because it's something that is really wonderful, I find. Okay, so as for the acceptance of the spiritual master, that is essential, because without the instruction of the bona fide spiritual master, one cannot progress in the spiritual science. One should approach the spiritual master with all humility, and offer him all services, so that he will be pleased to bestow his blessings upon the disciple. Because a bona fide spiritual master is a representative of Krishna, if he bestows any blessings upon his disciple, that will make the disciple immediately advanced, without the disciples following the regulative principles. Wow, okay. Or the regulative principles will be easier for one who has served the spiritual master without reservation. Jai! So let's serve the spiritual master without reservation. Cleanliness is essential for making advancement in spiritual life. There are two kinds of cleanliness, external and internal. External cleanliness means taking a bath, but for internal cleanliness one has to think of Krishna always and chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. This process cleans the accumulated dust of past karma from the mind. Steadiness. Steadiness means that one should be very determined to make progress in spiritual life. Without such determination, one cannot make tangible progress. So sometimes people say people have tried to really be active in their spiritual life, and it's like they say, I literally heard some devotees tell me that, yeah, I already tried that, meaning like the path of devotional service, following the regulative principles, chanting rounds, serving deities. Like, yeah, I tried that, but... And now they're just, being Krishna's devotees' friends, but they're not really. But unless you are determined to make progress, you won't, Prabhupada says here, you won't make tangible progress. So that means when you're determined, you're steady. And steady means you're continuing on this path. Okay. And self-control means that one should not accept anything which is detrimental to the path of spiritual progress. That's what self-control is. That, again, like in my mind, I'm taking to... I remember Rahini Sutta Prabhu, he was saying that he received the #1 award for book distribution. And he was supposed to go to Mayapur to receive it from Srila Prabhupada personally. But he thought that, distributing Prabhupada's books is more important. So, but later on he regretted. He was like, this was just... And actually, self-control, or this was the most, also heartbreaking story. I think there were some devotees, I don't remember which group they were, I don't even remember where it happened, but some devotees, I think they were Sankirtan devotees, they had darshan with Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada invited them for lunch. And they were like, no, thank you, Srila Prabhupada, we'll go. Either they went for service or some book distribution. He was like, okay. But at one point, you can say, wow, self-control. They're offered a meal, and they're like, no, we'll go do seva. But at another point, it would be so wonderful for their spiritual progress to receive some association from Srila Prabhupada while having lunch with him, right? So, I can just, I'm referring to these stories because in my life also, sometimes, you're practicing self-control, and you're either depriving yourself from some spiritual experiences, or depriving yourself from some, something very beneficial, or, favorable for your devotional service by thinking that you're practicing self-control. because we think that any sort of enjoyment in spiritual life is prohibited, or any sort of pleasure and happiness in spiritual life is bad. Right? Like when I just started talking to my husband, first we took blessings from our spiritual master, we checked the charts, we had 100 questions before we even officially met for the negotiations. All of this was done. The parents, the authorities are approved, everything is fine, and then we're starting to talk on the phone, and I find him nice. And I immediately think, maybe this is Maya. I'm telling you, this is literally what I thought at that moment. It's too good, it's too nice, it must be Maya. And I told it to my to-be fiance. I was like, I think this is Maya. And I remember I told it to one friend of mine also, that I think it's like we're talking and I really like it, maybe it's Maya. And I'm supposed to practice self-control, isn't it? So it's really like, do we really know if it's good for your spiritual life? He's a devotee, and you're like, it's a Krishna conscious arrangement. And, we were not like talking about some nonsense. He was just telling me about how what was that? Yeah, the first time we spoke, he was talking about his darshan with Kadambakanana Maharaj. It's like you're talking about Krishna conscious topics, but like it's too nice. It must be Maya. So, and I'm talking to a Prabhu for the first time in that way, so it must be Maya. It was really something. But no, this is not self-control. Self-control means that one should not accept anything which is detrimental to the path of spiritual progress. Next reading. One should become accustomed to this and reject anything which is against the path of spiritual progress. This is real renunciation. So if something is good for your spiritual progress, you should accept it. Another thing that really got, I remembered clearly also at Bimla Prasad Prabhu this time when he was giving classes for Brahminical culture and ethics. He was also saying about this renunciation, right? What is real renunciation? He's saying aversion does not equal detachment. Opposite of attachment is aversion. So renunciation is not like you're feeling averse to something and that's renunciation. And he was giving the example about talking to his sister, and he was saying that initially they were saying, oh, if you're talking to your sister and you're a brahmachari, that means that you will fall down and this and that. But what is this? A brahmachari, he sees every woman as a mother, and he can definitely talk to his sister, and especially if he was cultivating her, something to that effect in Krishna consciousness. She was a devotee. Even if she's not a devotee, he can preach to her. So all of these wonderful qualities, if we are misapplying them, that means we are in ignorance, and that means they will not work the way they're supposed to. So here again, one should become accustomed to this and reject anything which is against the path of spiritual progress. This is real renunciation. The senses are so strong and they are always anxious to have sense gratification. One should not cater to these demands, which are not necessary. The senses should only be gratified to keep the body fit, so that one can discharge his duty in advancing in spiritual life. I'll tell you one thing also regarding this, that you should not cater to the demands of the senses. But when I was, again, the same time when I was thinking that talking to my future fiancé is Maya, around the same time I was thinking that if my sister is constantly trying to hug me and enjoy my association, I was thinking that I'm catering to her sense of gratification. Right now it sounds ridiculous. But that was the kind of fanatic I was when I was 22. I was like, now I have a different perception. Now I think that, when my sister was a child of 13, 14 years old, she needed all the love and all the attention and all the care she could receive from her elder sister, which is supposedly her second mother. And instead of controlling my senses and not catering to her sense gratification, I should have understood that it's not. I just like right now I have so much. Of course I understand that I was ignorant, but it's an experience, and it's something that backfired as well, because then kids grow up and they remember. She doesn't have any grudges against me, but I feel that during the time when I was living together with her, and when I could give her that love, the sisterly love that I should have. It's not bad. It's Vaishnava relationships. There are loving exchanges between Vaishnavas, and that's different from sense gratification. And it's just like so different. You see? So I'm telling you, it's it comes with age, it comes with experience, and I wish somebody else would tell me. Of course I don't know where did I have all those ideas about, but supposedly I thought that I was being very philosophical, but actually I was being very I could say many things, but what I'm trying to share here is that you have to understand the difference between catering to the senses and having healthy, loving Vaishnava relationships. There's two different things. So here, right? The senses should be so gratified to keep the body fit so that one can discharge his duty in advancing in spiritual life. This you can apply to trying to, like, even when we are offering prasadam, there's nothing wrong with tasty prasadam, but too much of anything is bad, right? So we can go to different, but I think I've said enough, and I think that it was more or less understandable what I meant. So we'll just continue reading. The most important and uncontrollable sense is the tongue. If one can control the tongue, then there is every possibility of controlling the other senses. The function of the tongue is to taste and to vibrate. Therefore, by systematic regulation, the tongue should always be engaged in tasting the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna and chanting Hare Krishna. As far as the eyes are concerned, they should not be allowed to see anything but the beautiful form of Krishna. That will control the eyes. Similarly, the ears should be engaged in hearing about Krishna, and the nose in smelling the flowers offered to Krishna. This is the process of devotional service, and it is understood here that Bhagavad Gita is simply expounding the science of devotional service. Devotional service is the main and sole objective. Unintelligent commentators on the Bhagavad Gita try to divert the mind of the reader to other subjects, but there is no other subject in Bhagavad Gita than devotional service. Jai. So, maintain healthy relationships, maintain healthy lifestyle in Krishna consciousness. And may everything be favorable to your spiritual progress. Next, false ego means accepting this body as oneself. When one understands that he is not his body and the spirit soul, he comes to his real ego. Ego is there. That's a sentence. Ego is there. False ego is condemned, but not real ego. No, I love this. Let's read it again. When one understands that he is not his body and his spirit soul, he comes to his real ego. Ego is there. False ego is condemned, but not real ego. In the Vedic literature, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 1.4.10, it is said, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, I am spirit. This I am, the sense of self, also exists in the liberated stage of self-realization. This sense of I am is ego. But when the sense of I am is applied to this false body, it is false ego. When the sense of self is applied to reality, that is real ego. There are some philosophers who say we should give up our ego, but we cannot give up our ego, because ego means identity. We ought, of course, to give up the false identification with the body. Well, I really love this passage. Maybe because I have big false ego. But I wish to have big real ego. Or it can be small, but anyway. Ego is there. Jai. Next, one should try to understand the distress of accepting birth, death, old age, and disease. There are descriptions in various Vedic literatures of birth. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, the world of the unborn, the child's stay in the womb of the mother, its suffering, etc., are all very graphically described. It should be thoroughly understood that birth is distressful, because we forget how much distress we have suffered within the womb of the mother. We do not make any solution to the repetition of birth and death. Similarly, at the time of death, there are all kinds of sufferings, and they are also mentioned in the authoritative scriptures. These should be discussed. Interesting, right? Usually people try to avoid discussing birth and death, right? Because if you discuss death, you can summon death, right? But actually, Srila Prabhupada, he, in one lecture, I really liked that lecture, he said that we should always understand that death is standing right behind our shoulder. We can die at any moment. And it's up to Krishna to decide when it will happen, and whether we like it or not, it will happen whenever he decides. So here Prabhupada says it should be discussed. So we should not be afraid to discuss birth and death. And birth also, because many times it's something you want to forget about, right? Especially for maybe like the mother and maybe the father, if he was there. But or even if you read the description in the 3rd canto, right? Kapila Gita. Description is quite wow. My husband was afraid that I will be grossed out when we were reading recently Kapila Gita description of that birth, the entire procedure. I was not grossed out at all, because that's what's going on. It happened with us, with every single one of us, over and over again. It's something to be discussed. Okay. And as far as disease and old age are concerned, everyone gets practical experience. Yeah, disease and old age. Interesting, right? So the birth and death, we don't remember our own experience. So we don't discuss it because we're afraid of it, right? Or we're grossed out or anything. But here, Prabhupada says, as far as disease and old age are concerned, everyone gets practical experience. Okay, no one wants to be diseased and no one wants to become old. But there is no avoiding these. Unless we have a pessimistic view of this material life, considering the distresses of birth, death, old age, and disease, there is no impetus for our making advancement in spiritual life. Jai. So this, I always feel like, these modern, how do you call them? Coaches? Modern life coaches who are like, be positive no matter what. In any situation. I mean, we should be positive in the sense that, we're not supposed to be like depressed. It's not like everybody supposed to have like deep depression about their life. But this pessimistic view of material life is actually healthy. Because there's nothing to do in this material world. But if we are leading a wonderful spiritual life, then the world becomes Vaikuntha, even if you're living in the material world. So you're in this world, but not of this world, right? So yeah, this is very important. Devotees, they live in the material, they may be in the material, like in the material world, but because they're Krishna conscious, they're not of this world. So if we want to become devotees, we have to have a pessimistic view of this material life. Otherwise, there is no impetus for making advancement in spiritual life. Okay, so if you want impetus, if you want nice impetus for spiritual life, just remember how you were born. Read 3rd canto, or just think about death. Because I remember one time, one teacher of mine was asked how to preach to pious people, and he said, make a sticker, life is great, and then you die. Yeah. Okay. As for detachment from children, wife, and home, it is not meant that one should have no feelings for these. I think this is something that I mentioned before regarding my sister and my future husband. Okay. They are natural objects of affection. But when they are not favorable to spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. The best process for making the home pleasant in Krishna consciousness is Krishna consciousness. Jai. If one is in full Krishna consciousness, he can make his home very happy, because this process of Krishna consciousness is very easy. One need only chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Accept the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna. Have some discussion on books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and engage oneself in deity worship. These 4 things will make one happy. One should train the members of his family in this way. So see, this is the point. Like, there can be natural affection, and that can also be engaged in Krishna consciousness. That can be also dovetailed in Krishna consciousness. Not that we are begrudgingly looking at each other and chanting Hare Krishna. Happy family. What is this? Okay. So, one should train the members of his family in this way. The family members can sit down morning and evening and chant together Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. if one can mold his family life in this way to develop Krishna consciousness, following these 4 principles, then there is no need to change from family life to renounced life. But if it is not congenial, not favorable for spiritual advancement, then family life should be abandoned. Yes, because sometimes the husband, I heard many different options regarding this. Some devotees, they say that if the husband may not be super favorable, or the wife may not be super favorable, then the spouse, if he can practice spiritual life, being intelligent, not demonstratively, but having his own individual private practice, it's still workable. And I've seen that with years, actually, their spouses, they become more involved and actually also become devotees sometimes. So it's really, there are cases where it doesn't work to the point that family life should be abandoned. Yeah. I remember my father was saying that when he came, he brought the pot. He said, "This is Krishna's pot." And then he was married to one non-devotee, Mataji, and she just cooked something non-veg in that pot, and he was really disappointed. So sometimes spouses can be so unfavorable that it's not worth it. So then it should be abandoned. Okay, one must sacrifice everything to realize or serve Krishna, just as Arjuna did. Arjuna did not want to kill his family members, but when he understood that these family members were impediments to his Krishna realization, he accepted the instruction of Krishna and fought and killed them. In all cases, one should be detached from the happiness and distress of family life, because in this world one can never be fully happy or fully miserable. Happiness and distress are concomitant factors of material life. One should learn to tolerate, as advised in Bhagavad Gita. One can never restrict the coming and going of happiness and distress. So one should be detached from the materialistic way of life and be automatically equipoised in both cases. Generally, when we get something desirable, we are very happy. And when we get something undesirable, we are distressed. But if we are actually in a spiritual position, these things will not agitate us. To reach that stage, we have to practice unbreakable devotional service. Devotional service to Krishna without deviation means engaging oneself in the 9 processes of devotional service: chanting, hearing, worshipping, offering respect, etc., as described in the last verse of the 9th chapter. That process should be followed. Naturally, when one is adapted to the spiritual way of life, he will not want to mix with materialistic men. That would go against his grain. One may test himself by seeing how far he is inclined to live in a solitary place without unwanted association. Maybe we can test how far are we willing to distance ourselves from our phone, which may also be a source of unwanted association. Okay. Naturally, a devotee has no taste for unnecessary sporting or cinema going or enjoying some social function, because he understands that these are simply a waste of time. There are so many research scholars and philosophers who study sex life or some other subject, but according to Bhagavad Gita, such research work and philosophical speculation have no value. That is more or less nonsensical. According to Bhagavad Gita, one should make research by philosophical discretion into the nature of the soul. One should make research to understand the self. That is recommended here. As far as self-realization is concerned, it is clearly stated here that Bhakti Yoga is especially practical. As soon as there is a question of devotion, one must consider the relationship between the supersoul and the individual soul. The individual soul and the supersoul cannot be one, at least not in the Bhakti conception, the devotional conception of life. The service of the individual soul to the Supreme Soul is eternal, nityam, as it is clearly stated. So, Bhakti, or devotional service, is eternal. One should be established in that philosophical conviction. Haribol. In the Srimad Bhagavatam 1.2.11, this is explained. Vadanti tattvavidas tattvam yajnanamadvayam. Quote, those who are actually knowers of the absolute truth know that the self is realized in three different phases as Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagavan. Unquote. Bhagavan is the last word in the realization of the absolute truth. Therefore, one should reach up to that platform of understanding, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thus engage in the devotional service of the Lord. That is the perfection of knowledge. Jai. Beginning from practicing humility up to the point of realization of the supreme truth, the absolute personality of Godhead, this process is just like a staircase, beginning from the ground floor and going up to the top floor. Okay, I have to say this one. I know that we're having a long episode today, but this is a very important verse and I really wanted to kind of read it in one episode because we're in the flow, right? So, during Brahminical culture and ethics, there was one student. We were discussing prayers, and this student began to really question. He was humbly questioning. He was like, but Krishna already knows what's going on in my life. Why should I ask? Because there was a question of, requesting the Lord about something, praying to the Lord about something. And he was really, really pushing it. I was like, but the Lord already knows. But Krishna already knows. He's in my heart. Krishna already knows. He already knows. And it was really pushing it. And Premanjan Prabhu, as the teacher, he was explaining it in different ways that, why do we have so many prayers in Srimad Bhagavatam, this and that. And he really kept pushing that Krishna already knows. So then Premanjan Prabhu, he just figured out what was the actual question, and he's like, okay, there are three levels of realization. There is Brahman, there is Paramatma, and there is Bhagavan. So Paramatma is a stage of realization. Yes, Krishna is in the heart, he already knows. But Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead, just like here, right, is the last top floor of the realization, top floor of the process, right? That's when you realize that Bhagavan is a person. So as a person, you can talk to him, approach him, pray to him, request him, and he will respond, reciprocate. And Bimla Prasad Prabhu, he was also saying that, no, you're going into the zone that, like Krishna already knows what Radharani will say, So it's really, sometimes for some people it may be difficult to realize, okay, Okay, let us conclude. So it's like a staircase beginning from the ground floor and going up to the top floor. Now, on the staircase there are so many people who have reached the first floor, the second or the third floor, etc. But unless one reaches the top floor, which is the understanding of Krishna, he is at a lower stage of knowledge. If anyone wants to compete with God and at the same time make advancement in spiritual knowledge, he will be frustrated. It is clearly stated that without humility, understanding is not truly possible. To think oneself God is most puffed up. That's a nice way to put it. To think oneself God is most puffed up. Wow. Although the living entity is always being kicked by the stringent laws of material nature, he still thinks, I am God, because of ignorance. The beginning of knowledge, therefore, is amanitva, humility. One should be humble and know that he is subordinate to the Supreme Lord. Due to rebellion against the Supreme Lord, one becomes subordinate to material nature. One must know and be convinced of this truth. Wow. So if you find yourself in Maya, if you find yourself in subordination to material nature, you have to know that you must be rebellious against the Supreme Lord. And vice versa. If you are humble and you are submissive to the Supreme Lord, if you understand that I am Krishna's servant, I am, ego is there, I am Krishna's servant, the servant of the Lord, then you have to understand that you are cultivating your spiritual life and you are not being subordinate to material nature, you're being subordinate to the Lord. Jai. Okay then. Okay. And tomorrow we shall read the knowable, knowing which we will taste the eternal. Wow. Jai. So tomorrow we're tasting the eternal. Thank you so much for tuning in today. The book links, previous episodes timeline, and biography of the author can be found on shravanamdiaries.com. The link is in the description, and we shall see you tomorrow.
Hare Krishna, Krishna